Damon Williams shuffled down the cramped metal corridors of mining station Apollo 7, his work clothes stained with oil and sweat from another back-breaking 12-hour shift. The reactor maintenance bay had been particularly brutal today, with 3 cooling systems failing and the main power core acting up again. At 29 years old, Damon felt like he was 49, his body aching from years of manual labor in the Outer Rim colonies. He paused at one of the small viewing windows and stared out at the star field beyond. Once upon a time, he had dreamed of something bigger than this. 7 years ago, he had filled out the application for the elite Terran Psychic Division with shaking hands and wild hope in his heart. The ETPD was humanity's pride and joy, an elite force of men and women who combined mental abilities with cutting-edge technology to defend Earth's expanding colonies across the galaxy. The testing day had been humiliating. While other candidates lifted heavy objects with their minds or generated impressive energy shields, Damon could barely make a pencil wobble on a table. His telekinesis was so weak it was almost non-existent. Worse yet, he had these random energy surges that he couldn't control at all. During one demonstration, he had accidentally overloaded a testing computer, causing sparks to fly and smoke to fill the room. The examiner had looked at him with pity and told him to consider other career paths. So here he was, fixing broken pipes and replacing burnt-out circuits on a mining station so far from Earth that it took 3 months for mail to arrive. The pay was decent enough, and the work kept him busy, but Damon couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant for something more. His co-workers were good people, mostly, though they all knew about his failed attempt to join the Psychic Corps. Some of them ribbed him about it good-naturedly, while others just felt sorry for him. The emergency klaxons suddenly blared throughout the station, their harsh sound echoing off the metal walls. Red warning lights flashed in the corridors as the automated voice began its announcement. Alert! Alert! Unknown vessels detected approaching the system. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. Damon's blood ran cold. Unknown vessels out here could only mean one thing. Pirates were bad enough, but lately, there had been rumors of something much worse moving through this sector of space. The Korath Empire had been expanding aggressively, and their massive bioships had already destroyed 12 different civilizations completely. He ran toward the main observation deck, joining dozens of other workers who were pressing against the reinforced windows. What they saw made everyone fall silent with terror. The space around their small mining station was filling with ships, but these weren't like anything in the human fleet. The Korath vessels looked more grown than built, with organic curves and pulsing lights that resembled some kind of alien heartbeat. The largest ships were easily 10 times the size of Earth's biggest dreadnoughts, their hulls dark and glistening like the skin of some massive sea creature. Smaller fighter craft swarmed around them like angry insects, and Damon could see weapon ports opening along their sides like hungry mouths. Jackson Torres, the shift supervisor, stood next to Damon with his face pressed against the glass. Jackson was a tough guy who had worked the mining stations for over 20 years, but now his hands were shaking as he watched the alien fleet position itself around them. "Sweet Mother of Mercy," he whispered. "There must be thousands of them." The station's defense satellites tried to respond, their automated systems activating and targeting the closest Korath ships. It was like watching ants attack a bear. The alien weapons fired once, and the satellites simply vaporized in brilliant flashes of light. The defensive grid that had taken 5 years to build was gone in less than 30 seconds. "This is it," Jackson said quietly. "This is how we die. The Korath don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They just wipe out everything and move on to the next system." He looked over at Damon with sad eyes. "Not even a real psychic could save us now, kid. And no offense, but you're not exactly military material." Damon nodded, unable to argue with that assessment. His weak abilities had been useless for 7 years. What could he possibly do against an alien armada that had destroyed entire civilizations? He thought about his parents back on Earth, wondering if they would ever find out what happened to their son. He thought about all the things he had wanted to do with his life, all the dreams that would die with him on this remote mining station. The Korath ships moved closer, their biohulls pulsing with an eerie light as they prepared for the final assault on the helpless human outpost. The entire mining station shuddered violently as the first wave of Korath energy blasts struck the outer hull. Metal groaned and buckled under the assault, and the lights flickered on and off as power systems struggled to maintain stability. Emergency protocols kicked in automatically, sealing blast doors throughout the facility and directing all personnel to the reinforced emergency shelters deep in the station's core. Damon found himself pressed shoulder to shoulder with 50 other terrified miners in Shelter Bay 3. The space had been designed to hold maybe 30 people comfortably, but comfort wasn't exactly a priority right now. Everyone was trying to stay calm, but the fear in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Some people were praying quietly, others were calling their families on personal communicators while the signal still worked, and a few were just staring at the walls in shocked silence. Through the thick reinforced viewport, Damon could see the nightmare unfolding outside. The Korath fleet had spread out across the entire star system like a plague of metallic locusts. Their bioships pulsed with sickly green and purple lights, and he could actually see smaller vessels detaching from the larger ones and heading toward the planet below. They weren't just planning to destroy the mining station. They were going to sterilize the entire world, wiping out every trace of human presence in this sector. The air recycling system was working overtime to keep everyone breathing in the overcrowded shelter, but it was clearly struggling. Dust and debris from the damaged outer sections kept getting pulled through the filters, and the atmosphere was becoming thick and stale. Damon felt his nose starting to itch almost immediately. He had suffered from allergies his entire life, and dusty, poorly ventilated spaces were always a trigger for him. Maria Gonzalez, one of the senior engineers, was trying to monitor the external cameras from a small control panel in the corner. Her face was pale as she watched the tactical display. "They are positioning themselves for a final bombardment," she announced to the group. "Looks like they want to finish this quickly and move on." Damon pressed his face against the viewport and felt his heart sink even further. The largest Korath command ship, easily the size of a small city, was moving directly overhead. Its biohull was covered in what looked like massive weapon ports, all of them beginning to glow with deadly energy. This thing could probably crack the planet in half if it wanted to. His nose was getting worse by the minute. The itching sensation spread from his sinuses down into his throat, and he could feel that familiar pressure building behind his eyes. He tried to breathe through his mouth, but that just made his throat feel dry and scratchy. A sneeze was coming, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't be a big deal. People sneeze all the time. But Damon's sneezes had always been different. Ever since he was a kid, they had caused weird electrical problems. Light bulbs would blow out, computers would glitch, and sometimes small electronics would just stop working entirely. It was one of the reasons he had failed so badly at the psychic testing. The doctor said it was some kind of uncontrolled energy discharge, but they had never been able to fix it or even explain it properly. He tried to suppress the sneeze, pressing his tongue against the roof of his mouth and pinching his nose. The last thing these people needed right now was their shelter's life support systems going haywire because of his stupid allergies. But the pressure kept building, and the dusty air kept irritating his already sensitive sinuses. 27 years of failure and disappointment seemed to weigh down on him all at once. All those dreams of being something special, of making a difference in the universe, of proving that he wasn't just a broken reject who couldn't even control his own body properly. And now he was going to die in this cramped metal box, surrounded by strangers, watching an alien armada prepare to erase everything he had ever known. The sneeze hit him like a freight train. It exploded out of him with such force that his entire body convulsed, and for just a moment, everything went white. But this wasn't like his usual embarrassing power surges. This was something completely different, something that felt like it was tearing through the very fabric of space itself. A wave of brilliant blue-white energy erupted from his body, expanding outward in all directions at incredible speed. It passed through the shelter walls like they weren't even there, harmless to the humans inside but carrying with it every ounce of Damon's desperation and rage and impossible hope that somehow, someway, these alien monsters would just disappear forever. The silence that followed was more terrifying than all the explosions and alarms that had come before. For a moment, everyone in the emergency shelter just stood frozen, unsure of what had happened or if they were even still alive. Then Maria looked at her monitor screen and let out a gasp that made everyone turn toward her. "They're gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Half of them are just gone." Damon wiped his nose with the back of his hand and was shocked to see bright red blood smeared across his skin. His head was pounding like someone had hit him with a sledgehammer, and his vision was still a little blurry from whatever had just happened to him. But he managed to stumble over to the viewport and look outside. What he saw defied every law of physics he had ever learned. The massive Korath command ship that had been positioned directly above them was breaking apart in complete silence. Huge chunks of its biohull were peeling away and drifting off into space like dead skin. The pulsing lights that had covered its surface were flickering out one by one, until the entire vessel went dark and lifeless. It wasn't just the flagship either. Everywhere Damon looked, Korath ships were dying. Some of them were convulsing like living creatures in their death throes, their organic hulls twisting and writhing before going completely still. Others simply went black all at once, their power systems failing so completely that they became nothing more than floating scrap metal. The smaller bioships were the most disturbing to watch. These vessels were actually alive in some alien way, and Damon could see them spasming and thrashing as whatever passed for their nervous systems overloaded and burned out. Within seconds, they stopped moving entirely, their bodies floating dead in the vacuum of space. Jackson had been quietly writing something on a piece of paper when the energy wave hit, probably a final message to his family back on Earth. Now he was staring at Damon with an expression of absolute terror mixed with complete amazement. His mouth was hanging open, and the paper had fallen from his trembling fingers. "What did you do?" Jackson asked in a hoarse whisper. "Kid, what in the hell did you just do?" Damon didn't have an answer. He looked down at his hands, which were still shaking uncontrollably, and tried to understand what had happened. 1 minute he had been about to sneeze, and the next minute half an alien armada was floating dead in space. It didn't make any sense at all. The surviving Korath ships were in complete chaos. The ones that hadn't been destroyed by the mysterious energy wave were flying around in random patterns, firing their weapons at empty space or at each other. Some of them were trying to retreat to the edge of the star system, while others seemed to be searching desperately for whatever weapon had just decimated their fleet. On the emergency communication channels, voices were screaming over each other in a dozen different languages. Earth Defense Command was trying to get status reports from every outpost and colony in the sector. Deep space monitoring stations were reporting massive energy readings that didn't match anything in their databases. Military commanders were demanding to know what new weapon had been deployed and why they hadn't been informed about it. "This is Admiral Hayes aboard the battleship Yorktown," a stern female voice cut through the chaos on the main channel. "All stations, report immediately. We're detecting massive energy signatures from mining station Apollo 7. Repeat, Apollo 7, please respond and explain the nature of your defensive systems." Maria fumbled with the communication controls, her hands shaking as she tried to open a channel back to Earth Command. "This is Apollo 7, she managed to say. We don't have any defensive systems. We're just a mining operation. We don't understand what happened either." There was a long pause before Admiral Hayes responded. "Apollo 7, our sensors show that an energy burst equivalent to a Nova-class explosion originated from your exact coordinates. Please explain how a civilian mining station generated that level of destructive force." Everyone in the shelter turned to look at Damon, who was still wiping blood from his nose and trying to process what had happened. He felt like he was in some kind of dream or hallucination. Ordinary people didn't destroy alien fleets by sneezing. That kind of thing only happened in movies or video games. The remaining Korath ships had pulled back to maximum sensor range, clearly trying to figure out what had hit them. Damon could see them on the long-range displays, moving in careful patterns as they scanned the mining station over and over again. Their sensors would be looking for weapon signatures, energy readings, anything that could explain how a small human outpost had just eliminated half of their invasion force in a matter of seconds. But there was nothing for them to find. Apollo 7 really was just a mining station, with standard industrial equipment and a crew of ordinary workers who extracted valuable minerals from the local asteroid belt. The most dangerous thing on the entire station was probably the plasma cutter in Bay 7, and that could barely cut through a sheet of metal, let alone destroy a fleet of warships. Jackson finally found his voice again. "Damon," he said slowly, "I think you need to tell these people what just happened. Because right now, every military commander in human space thinks we've got some kind of secret superweapon out here." 3 days after the incident, Admiral Monica Davis arrived at mining station Apollo 7 aboard the massive battlecruiser Defender, bringing with her an entire fleet of support vessels and the most advanced investigation team that Earth Command could assemble. She had been expecting to find some kind of revolutionary new weapon system, maybe a prototype defense grid that had been secretly installed without her knowledge, or perhaps evidence of alien technology that humans had somehow reverse-engineered. What she found instead was completely underwhelming. Apollo 7 was exactly what it appeared to be, a small, cramped mining facility with outdated equipment and a crew of exhausted workers who seemed just as confused as everyone else about what had happened. The station's most impressive piece of technology was a 20-year-old asteroid processing unit that barely functioned on a good day. Admiral Davis was a career military officer who had spent 30 years working her way up through the ranks. She had fought pirates in the Outer Rim, commanded exploration missions into uncharted space, and dealt with more alien first contact situations than she cared to remember. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for this particular puzzle. The security footage was absolutely impossible to believe. The station's cameras had recorded everything from multiple angles, and no matter how many times the technical team analyzed the data, the conclusion was always the same. A maintenance worker named Damon Williams had sneezed, and immediately afterward, half of the most powerful alien fleet in known history had simply stopped existing. Damon's personnel file made the situation even more baffling. He was a failed psychic candidate with a record full of minor disciplinary actions and poor performance reviews. His supervisors consistently described him as a decent worker but noted that he had a tendency to cause electrical problems whenever he got sick or stressed. The file contained multiple incident reports about blown fuses, crashed computer systems, and malfunctioning equipment, all somehow connected to Damon's presence during moments of physical distress. Dr. Kevin Thompson, the fleet's leading expert on human psychic abilities, set up a temporary laboratory in one of the station's cargo bays and began running tests on Damon around the clock. The doctor was a thin, intense man who had spent most of his career studying the mysterious mental powers that had started appearing in humans about 50 years earlier. He had worked with some of the most powerful psychics in Earth's military, but he had never seen readings quite like the ones he was getting from Damon. The equipment showed that Damon possessed enormous psychic potential, more raw power than Dr. Thompson had ever measured in a single individual. But it was completely wild and uncontrolled, like a nuclear reactor that had never been properly contained or regulated. Under normal circumstances, when Damon was calm and relaxed, he could barely make the needles on the doctor's instruments twitch. Lifting a paperclip with his mind required intense concentration and left him exhausted. But when Dr. Thompson introduced stress factors into the testing environment, everything changed dramatically. Loud noises, flashing lights, or even just the knowledge that he was being evaluated would cause Damon's psychic readings to spike significantly. And when the doctor deliberately introduced dust and other allergens into the air, the instruments went completely crazy. It's like his allergic reactions are somehow connected to his psychic abilities, Dr. Thompson explained to Admiral Davis during one of their daily briefings. When his body goes into distress, his mind seems to channel that physical discomfort into pure destructive energy. I've never seen anything like it in all my years of research. The testing had to be conducted very carefully, because even minor psychic surges from Damon were enough to overload sensitive electronic equipment. On 2 separate occasions, he had accidentally crashed the entire laboratory computer system just by sneezing during a routine scan. The doctor had been forced to move all the critical equipment to a separate room and monitor Damon through thick shielding. Meanwhile, the surviving Korath ships had regrouped at the edge of the star system and were sending increasingly frantic diplomatic messages to Earth Command. Their ambassadors described scenes of utter devastation, with entire battle fleets reduced to floating debris in a matter of seconds. They spoke of bioships whose living nervous systems had been completely burned out, and advanced warships that had been rendered as powerless as dead rocks floating in space. The aliens were demanding to know what kind of superweapon humanity had developed, and they wanted immediate negotiations to prevent further conflict. Their messages carried an undertone of genuine fear that was completely unlike anything Earth's diplomats had ever heard from the typically arrogant Korath Empire. Earth's negotiating team, led by Ambassador Patricia Wells, was struggling to provide answers because they honestly didn't understand what had happened either. During the first diplomatic contact session, she could only offer vague assurances about humanity's defensive capabilities and protective measures without actually explaining what those capabilities were or how they worked. The Korath ambassadors were clearly frustrated by these non-answers, but they were also too afraid to push too hard. They had seen their mighty fleet reduced to scrap metal by an unknown force, and they weren't eager to provoke another demonstration of human power until they understood what they were dealing with. Back on Apollo 7, Damon was feeling increasingly uncomfortable with all the attention. Military personnel followed him everywhere, scientists were constantly running tests on him, and he could feel the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on his shoulders. He was just a maintenance worker who had always been terrible at controlling his abilities, and now suddenly everyone was treating him like he was the most important person in human space. Within 2 weeks, news of the Apollo station incident had spread to every corner of known space, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees from a dozen different star systems. The story grew with each telling, becoming more dramatic and terrifying as it passed from one species to another. Humans had apparently developed a superweapon so powerful that it could destroy entire fleets instantly, and they had used it to obliterate half of the mighty Korath Armada without any warning or negotiation. Damon's life changed completely overnight. One day he had been fixing broken equipment and complaining about overtime shifts, and the next day he was the most important person in human space. Military guards followed him everywhere, even to the bathroom. Scientists wanted to study every aspect of his biology, from his brain waves to his blood chemistry. Government officials kept asking him questions about his abilities and his potential for military applications. Dr. Thompson's research had revealed some disturbing truths about what had happened during the attack. The energy wave that had destroyed the Korath ships wasn't just a single burst of psychic power. It was what the Doctor called a cascade reaction, where Damon's initial sneeze had somehow triggered a chain of increasingly powerful energy releases that fed off each other until they reached catastrophic levels. Think of it like a nuclear explosion, Dr. Thompson explained to a room full of military commanders and government officials. A small amount of material reaches critical mass, and then the reaction spreads exponentially until it releases tremendous amounts of energy. Damon's psychic abilities seemed to work the same way when he's under extreme stress. The problem was that nobody could predict when these reactions would occur or how powerful they might be. Dr. Thompson had tried to recreate the conditions from Apollo Station in controlled laboratory settings, but Damon's abilities remained frustratingly unpredictable. Sometimes a deliberate sneeze would cause nothing more than a few flickering lights. Other times, a mild cough would overload every piece of electronic equipment within 50 meters. General Patricia Hayes, the head of Earth's military command, saw Damon as the ultimate strategic weapon. She wanted to train him, to find ways to control and direct his abilities so that they could be used against Earth's enemies. In her mind, Damon represented the key to human dominance in the galaxy, a way to make other species fear and respect humanity's power. We could end wars before they start, she argued during heated strategy meetings. One demonstration of what this man can do, and no alien species would dare attack human colonies again. We'd have peace through superior firepower. But Ambassador Wells and the diplomatic corps had a different vision. They saw Damon as the perfect deterrent, a living guarantee that Earth would never be conquered or destroyed. They didn't want to use his abilities aggressively. Instead, they wanted other species to know that humanity possessed this incredible defensive capability, so that conflicts could be avoided entirely through negotiation and mutual respect. The alien response to these rumors was immediate and dramatic. The Korath Empire, which had been preparing to launch follow-up attacks against human colonies, suddenly requested emergency peace talks. Their ambassadors arrived at Earth's diplomatic stations with unprecedented offers of trade agreements, territorial concessions, and mutual defense pacts. Other species that had previously ignored humanity or treated Earth as a minor power began reaching out with their own proposals. The Valdari Consortium offered exclusive mining rights in 3-star systems. The Nexus Federation proposed a joint research agreement that would give humans access to advanced alien technology. Even the mysterious Phantom Lords, who rarely communicated with anyone, sent cryptic messages expressing their desire for peaceful coexistence with the new human superpower. Earth's position in galactic politics shifted so quickly that many government officials couldn't keep up with all the incoming diplomatic requests. Humanity went from being a small, relatively insignificant species on the outer rim of civilized space to being courted by every major power in the galaxy. Trade routes that had been closed to human ships were suddenly opened. Scientific exchanges that had been refused for decades were now being offered freely. But Damon himself was struggling with the enormous pressure and expectations that had been placed on his shoulders. He didn't want to be a weapon or a deterrent or a strategic asset. He just wanted to go back to his simple life of maintaining atmospheric processes and fixing broken equipment. The luxury research facility where he was now living felt more like a prison than a home, despite the comfortable furniture and gourmet food. The worst part was knowing how fragile and unreliable his abilities really were. Everyone seemed to think that he could destroy alien fleets whenever he wanted to, but the truth was that he had no control over his power at all. It was triggered by his allergies, his anxiety, his stress levels, and a dozen other factors that he couldn't predict or manage. During quiet moments, when the scientists and military officials weren't watching him, Damon would look out the windows of his new facility and think about the future that Earth Command was planning. They imagined humanity rising to become the dominant species in the galaxy, protected by his unpredictable psychic abilities and feared by every other civilization in known space. But he knew the terrifying reality. The entire human empire, with all its colonies and trade routes and diplomatic achievements, was now dependent on one man's hay fever and his tendency to have panic attacks in stressful situations. The universe's newest superpower was built on the most unreliable foundation imaginable, the uncontrollable sneezes of a failed maintenance worker who just wanted to be left alone.